Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're joined today by Michael Hudson, famous professor of economist, written many excellent books focusing on industrial capitalism and the economy. So I wanted to discuss with you today I guess the reorganization of the world economy because I think most now agree, even though we're all disagreeing in terms of what direction the world economy is going. The consensus, at least, is that America-centric globalization has more or less come to an end in terms of when the whole world pursued the free open market, which to a large extent meant integration under or around US technologies, industries, American-led transportation corridors, use of American development banks, payment systems like SWIFT, and use of the US dollar. So overall, the time when globalization at least meant the Americanization of the world appears to have come to more or less an end. But we see nonetheless different thoughts. Is globalization breaking down? Is it breaking into regions? Or is it simply other countries taking the lead? On this is where the discussions appear to be going. But I wanted to ask first about how we can explain China, because the rise of China is again, it is spectacular. We've never seen such a drastic rise in human history. So how do you make sense of this becoming yes so dominant and being able now to shift its entire economic model as well?
Well, actually, China has followed exactly the same policy that made the United States and Germany rise to industrial power in the late 19th century. It's kept basic public utilities and public needs in the public domain, not letting it privatize. And the most important basic public utility that China has kept thoroughly in the public domain is banking and credit. So China, you can imagine when China began to develop, it did not have a wealthy industrial class that was able to tell the government, well, if you want to finance capital investment in railroads and roads and building up the economy, you have to borrow from us and pay us interest. Because there wasn't a class like that. So China had to, in a way, reinvent the wheel. And it followed the same logic spontaneously that the United States had done. It didn't have much choice except to say, all right, we've got to create our own bank, print our own fiat money, and use our money to finance our spending into the economy. Well, in a way, you could say that China faced the same problem that the American colonies did in the 17th and 18th century when they created their own fiat paper currency so that colonists wouldn't have to use bullion and coinage that it borrowed from the wealthy British merchants who came here. China was self-financed its economic development, and that was the key. It didn't have an a financial class to essentially financialize industry, which has occurred in the West. It industrialized the financial system by keeping it in the public domain. And I think the question that you'd asked is, why can't the United States compete with China? Why can't America, if China's followed the way in which the United States industrialized, why can't the United States do that today? And the fact is that America has not tried to compete with China at all economically. There's no competition. That is not a good way to think about the hatred that America feels for China and the racist character of this vicious American nationalism that you have. My wife is Asian, and she's often spit at or had nasty comments calling her Chinese. in the public subways. You can't imagine the anti-Chinese passions that are being pushed today. What the United States is trying to do isn't to compete with China, but to hurt it, to injure it, to support Wahhabi terrorism in the northwestern parts, to prevent it, do everything it can to slow down China's industrialization, which of course it can't do. To compete with China, if it want, United States would have to do what it did in the 19th century. It would have to deprivatize its public utilities that it's privatized and financialized. It would need progressive taxation. Trump is against progressive taxation. He wants to shift the tax burden off the rentier interests, the financial interests, the real estate interests, and the monopolies that are his main backers, and shift the government financing onto labor without any thought of modern monetary theory doing what the Chinese did and simply creating its own money to spend into the economy because he's sort of backing the banks, even if he doesn't quite realize this. So the United States would have to be a different kind of economy than what it has become in order to compete with China and other countries industrially. It would have to go back from finance capitalism to the dynamic of industrial capitalism. And the tendency of industrial capitalism for the very beginning was to evolve into socialism in a mixed public-private economy. And it evolved into socialism by saying the certain spheres of investment, capital investment, belong in the hands of government, like transportation and communication and healthcare and education. All these are natural monopolies. And the idea, in order to prevent a privatization of economic rents and increasing them at the expense of wages and industrial profits, you have to keep these in the hands of the government. That's what's left out of account in discussion because most of the economic doctrine that's taught throughout the whole West is anti-government, the idea that private sector does it better. And the fact is, private sector doesn't do natural monopolies better. It turns the economy into what Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair did for England. It destroys the economy as the right wing of the political spectrum, the Labour parties and the social democratic parties all jumped on the neoliberal bandwagon and said, let's just sell off the government and lower the taxes on the rich by selling off government property to private buyers like Thames Water in England. We can sell off Thames Water and they'll certainly lower everybody's water prices and give us cleaner water. Well, as you know, Thames Water is just the poster child for what's wrong with privatization. The costs have gone way up, and the firm is teetering on bankruptcy now because the water companies and other privatized companies in Britain have simply borrowed money and paid their owners special dividends. The whole description of finance capitalism that I've discussed elsewhere. So, how is America going to actually rival other countries? I won't say compete. It can't compete with them. It knows that it can't compete with them. China's trying to go forward and develop rising living standards. The aim of the U.S. policy is to go backwards, to lower living standards, to concentrate income and the entire economic surplus in the hands of the 1% that will essentially, and they've privatized government through the Supreme Court Citizens United ruling, letting corporations and individuals buy control of the election process that decides what candidates are going to get the election funding to run for office, and you have a financialized political system. You could say it's rent seeking. They've turned the so-called democratic process into a rent-seeking, financialized process. So, what can America do? All it can do is to try and disrupt China's development and to try to drain it militarily by promoting sabotage from the Wahhabi Al Qaeda Uyghur fighters in Xinjiang, and spurring fighting by Taiwan against the mainland to keep joining. And just yesterday, Google retitled the South China Sea as the Philippine Sea. It's trying to divide and conquer, the old British idea. It's trying America's role in the economy is purely destructive, to impose chaos, to somehow think that it can use its ability to impose chaos and disrupt other countries' economy as a means of getting concessions to say, well, we won't attack you economically. We won't overthrow your government with regime change, as we've seen in Romania and other countries, if you follow our policies. It's just playing for the short-term political time frame. And all it can do is disrupt. There's no competition really at work.
Well, no, I agree with the very destructive economic model the United States is on, and I also, yeah, I acknowledge that the industrial capitalism of China is to a large extent mimicked that one of the United States in the 19th century when the U.S. sought to yeah, create autonomy from the British. But a common criticism, though, against China has been, you know, that it often is labeled almost neo-mercantilist. That is, they say, you know, by maximizing exports, for example, and making itself, well, gradually the factory of the world while accruing a lot of foreign reserves. Um, now, and using, of course, these reserves to, yeah, subsidize technological development. Now, again, I see this as being to a large extent what the United States, Germany, France, Japan, Russia, and others did throughout the 19th century. So I wouldn't yeah, blame China for this amazing growth. Indeed, I'm a huge fan of China, but these grievances though of the United States, the idea that yeah, China kind of priced itself into the market. How would you address these grievances in Washington, and what are possible ways of resolving it?
China did initially accumulate enough money to industrialize itself by an export policy. It is certainly in the last few weeks, it has dropped any hint of mercantilism. In fact, just the opposite. It said, we're not going to import from the United States anymore. We're not going to export to the United States. We've imposed all the export controls on we're doing. We're doing the same thing to Europe. We're now trying to use all of the surplus productive power that we have to develop the internal market, to raise living standards here, and to invest in research, development, and further capital investment to increase the productivity of our economy. That's not mercantilist as such. It's more inward looking. And mercantilism is basically an exploitative system. How do we get other countries' economic surplus and pass it into our own pockets? China realizes that in order to expand not only its markets, but its political safety and its military independence from America interference, instead of taking a win-lose approach, the mercantile approach of America first, where Trump says we have to be the winner in any kind of international transaction we have, China is following a win-win policy. We have to gain. When President Xi was in Vietnam in the last few days, he's trying to say we had 1,000 years of warfare between us, but this is a different world situation now. What can we offer you that both of our economies can get a mutual gain by working with each other? How can we structure our trade and investment so that we both gain and we create a system that is independent from US and European interference with what we're trying to do? So the whole philosophy is socially, politically, and economically quite different from mercantilism. China cannot be explicitly exploitative. And when it gained the American market, this was not China's policy of exploitation. This was the policy of the Democratic Party under Bill Clinton and his followers to offshore American labor. The Democrats began this policy under Jimmy Carter with the agreements that trade with Mexico and Canada to create maquiladora, affiliates of American firms in northern Mexico along the border with the United States to produce low wage goods, so in order to prevent America's wage rates from rising. That was the aim of Carter, to lower American wages and living standards. That's why he appointed the Treasury Secretary, who raised interest rates to to 20% and just basically blocked it created unemployment. So the China's mercantilism was not only a policy of exploiting other countries by the mercantilist country, but a class war at home to exploit labor. And China's not doing either of these.
My next question was about the capitalism of Russia, because again, China and Russia really, the two main communist adversaries during the Cold War, and now they both turned into a very competitive capitalism. But in the 1990s, the Russians embraced very much the ideas of the free market capitalism, but for them it resulted in an energy curse that meant they ended up with a new international division of labor, that is the Russians began to export a lot of energy, and with that revenue from energy exports, they could import goods from the West, given that their industries had lost some competitiveness. And with this, they began to deindustrialize. This was the argument. Now, what we've seen since is the alternative, which then they use more income from energy sales, which can then be used to build other industries. So they focus a lot on agriculture, technology. How do you interpret Russia's, I guess, political economy? Because this seems to be, the Europeans, especially as well as American, appears to be quite surprised by this, because we were told Russia was a gas station masquerading as a country. And now suddenly, with all the sanctions we could possibly throw at them, we see their economy growing, and according to the World Bank, become now the fourth largest economy in the world. And so how do you, in terms of purchasing power parity, so how do you explain the Russian economic model?
The aim of the Yeltsin administration was to follow the United States and make sure that Russia succumbed to an energy curse. Yeltsin wanted the energy curse because that was why the United States were supporting him. The United States wanted to turn over Yukos oil and the other oil companies and the minerals, Norilsk nickel, to private owners. And the private owners were essentially to cash in on what they took by working with Western financial interests to financialize this rent and to prevent it from being used to finance domestic industry. All the profits were to be not paid in taxes at all, but transferred to the stock owners and the Westerners who had made the Russian stock market the leading stock market in the world in 1995. 96. So the neoliberal idea was to make sure that Russia did not become anything more than a gas station with atom bombs. When Putin came in, he had to confront the fact that the Americans and Europeans had installed this rent-seeking kleptocratic class. The only solution that Putin could have, was an ad hoc solution of what we'd call in America jawboning, of telling the kleptocrats, well, we're going to enable you to keep your ownership of the banks and the oil wells and the public utilities that you stole under Yeltsin, under American leadership of Jeffrey Sachs and other people who were in charge of this vast theft. But you have to use your income to help finance Russian industrialization. But Russia didn't really have and still does not have an economic theory of how to develop. Stalinism had erased the whole history of classical economics and value theory and rent theory is part of its erasure of Russia, of Marxism. So when I began to go to Russia in 1994 to talk to the Duma and try to convince Russia to not to follow the neoliberal policy, there was no understanding of Marxism whatsoever. It was just a label. There was no understanding of classical economics. They really didn't know what to do, and the fight that I was in before the Duma actually began already in 1991. The leading property appraiser in the United States, Ted Gortney, went to St. Petersburg, met with the St. Petersburg mayor, and Putin was his assistant at that time, and tried to convince the mayor to essentially base St. Petersburg's and Russia's tax system on taxing the land rent. He said there's going to be an increase, a rising price of housing and real estate from all of this. And your choices, do you want this to end up in private hands? Is the Russian population has to borrow from the banks to buy all of this property, or do you want this land rent to become the tax base of St. Petersburg? And the mayor of St. Petersburg said, well, how do we estimate the value of land rent? And so they walked down the street in St. Petersburg, and Ted Gortney said, well, you notice this, look at the sun, it's late autumn, almost fall. You notice there's a lot of sunshine on one side of the street, and it's very dark on the other side of the street. This makes, if you have a store, you're going to sell things, you're going to want to be on the sunny side of the street where the people are walking in order to keep warm. This is the most valuable property there is. Well, when I went to Russia, and beginning in 1994, 95, the people were the big American attempt to buy an industrial firm was to buy the Moscow Chocolate Company right across the Moscow River from the Kremlin. And they thought, oh, if we can buy this property, we can gentrify it and make it very valuable. They tried to buy the GUM department store and make that
next to Red Square, yeah.
Yes, yes. but Russia did not let them do it in either case. So the Americans wanted basically to carve out land rent opportunities there, and there was so much American pressure that the Duma politicians who brought me and my colleagues over, Ramsey Clark, I brought over a group of other people, that the American basically the National Endowment for Democracy manipulated the political process so that the people who were supporting my ideas did not get qualified for re-election in one way or another. Sviatoslav I won't get in. Vyacheslav was one of them. So the idea there was a whole fight by the West to promote neoliberalism there and to prevent the idea of that there was an alternative to neoliberalism and Thatcherism. Well, there was a lot of talk. There was some talk when I was there about Sergey Vit, for instance. How do we go back to what Vit was trying to do under the czars in the early 20th century? And he became sort of a symbol without any attempt to say, well, what was Witt's idea? What was the whole context? What was his frame of reference when he was trying to develop how to develop Russian industrial power? And again, the focus of classical economics was on rent and price theory, which was developed to measure and isolate economic rent so that it could be taxed away as the foundation for government finance. That's what Adam Smith wanted. John Stuart Mill was the first item in the Communist Manifesto. It's what the socialists wanted in the late 19th century. All of this was the central essence of classical political economy. But that wasn't taught in Russia, and certainly when they, or the Chinese for that matter, sent their students to the United States to learn economics, this is not what they learned in their economics courses because there was no economic history and no history of economic thought for all of that. So the great aim of industrial capitalism and that of Witt under Tsarism was to free economies from the whole legacy of feudalism. Above all, the hereditary landed aristocracy and its land rents, and the focus on economic rent to be freed. A free market was a market free of economic rent, not only land rent, but monopoly rent, and including the bank monopoly that enabled banks to charge interest for the privilege of creating private credit. The whole idea was to minimize the economy's cost of production, cost of living, cost of doing business by freeing it from economic rent. Well, the concept of economic rent was sort of ended in the late 1890s, early 20th century, as the rentiers fought back and developed an anti-classical economics, saying, well, there's no difference between value and price. Everybody earns whatever they make. Earning money by finance and banking or landlordship is the same. So today's Russia has no background in the economic theory of rent, and this is why there's a lot of criticism of the central bank in simply raising interest rates to try to prevent the inflation, which is the inflation doesn't result from basically from labor being paid more. The inflation results from the American attempts to isolate Russia, to sanction Russia, and to force it to use more and more income for capital investment to develop its own agriculture, food production, industrial production, military production, and all of the other aspects of the economy. So I guess you could say that Russia is living in the legacy of Stalinism's vulgarization of Marxism that paid really no attention to volume 2 and 3 of Capital or Theories of Surplus Value, where Marx discussed economic rent and finance. I made many trips to get Russia to try to finance its budget by a land rent tax, and I was one of the people brought over to consult with President Medvedev when in between Putin's two administrations. And the Academy of Sciences published my articles criticizing the World Bank and the IMF attempts to create Russian dependency. But again, there's very little, there's nowhere near the economic support from ideas in Russia that there is, say, in China, where almost all my main books have been translated and used in the courses there. So Russia is still suffering under the fact that most of its rent yielding monopolies are still in the hands of kleptocrats. Putin is able to politically constrain the kleptocrats to use their money to help the economy rather than just to accumulate more wealth for themselves. But I guess that's why the United States wants the regime change in Russia. They want a free market in which the class war is back in business there, and the private owners of monopolies will simply try to cash out by working with American stock brokerage companies and floating their stocks in the United States and becoming billionaires by selling rent-seeking rights in Russia to American stockholders and private capital.
Well, they're in a strange situation, though, given that by the time they abandoned communism, the one alternative was neoliberal economics. So yeah, they had to more or less, I guess, start to learn industrial capitalism more or less from scratch. Anyways, Michael Hudson, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks for asking me these questions. It was a good discussion, Glenn.